The man I love is the rainbow in the skies above. Let his light of peace shine to you all. Let your love shine peace to us all. He loves us all.
Good evening. I'm so pleased to be joining you this evening for this beautiful event, for this beautiful purpose that we're all here united together for. I'm Rena Priest, and I'm just going to open us up with a poem that I wrote. It's in this anthology, For Love of Orcas, that was put together by a Bellingham poet and an Orcas Island writer. That's Andrew Shepard McBride and Jonah K. Thompson. They pulled together this effort, reaching out to poets from all over the world to submit poetry about the endangered orcas. And so I went ahead and submitted and then selected this poem for publication, and I'll just share it with you to get us started here. It's called Words of Encouragement. And it has an epigraph by the poet W.S. Merwin from his poem On Coming Extinction. The poem, or the epigraph says, "One must always pretend something among the dying." Words of encouragement. When writing poems about extinction, it's important that you make the poems deep, but uplifting. Nobody wants to read a bummer poem about endangered orcas and their dead babies. Keep it light. Keep it motivational, encouraging. It's important to accommodate your gentle readers. Don't say anything about how if you won't swim in it, why should they have to live in it? Don't say that. Honesty is offensive in this day and age. It's always been offensive. How else do you suppose we got here? Maybe instead of saying something like, the orcas and salmon are going extinct because of ordinary greed and apathy, instead, say something like, the noble creature with his power and grace shall journey away forever through the portals of time. Good taste. Omits mention of baby orcas abducted to be theme park clowns, decades in chlorinated cages taking their eyes, how during the capture so many died. And don't forget to forget what you know about human cruelty. How the baby orcas that didn't survive had their bellies slit and filled with stones, then were sewn closed and dumped into the sea to sink into a darkness so deep public outrage couldn't reach, a depth unfathomable as a mother's grief, too heavy to carry for one day, much less 17. Among the dying shall we pretend that in the end we too shall not be listed among the dead? Yes, let's pretend when writing poems about extinction.
To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territories you reside on, and a way of honoring the indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on the land and to seek to understand your place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current and ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our presence in that participation. Land acknowledgements are to honor the Coast Salish people, Lummi Nation, and Nooksack, not just in this moment, but every single day. Well, welcome back, everybody. My name is Victoria Mate Mendoza. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the MCs for the night. So some quick fun facts. I can sometimes spin fire if I've had enough to drink. I've done 2 TED Talks. And I have a lot of opinions. I will now be introducing the second MC, my roommate and justice sister, and the new director of the Whatcom Justice Center. She will introduce herself and share with us her goals, her passion, and her vision moving forward. Please help me welcome Alini Prata.
Good evening, everyone. I especially enjoyed hearing a lot about Dorothy Dale and from Dan, her son, about her trips, her solidarity trips back in the day, and also getting to learn from Carrie and Martina and many other folks who are peace vigilists, how they got involved in maintaining the longest standing peace vigil in the United States. I'm so looking forward to continue to learn from you. Although I've officially started working at the PJC only this year, I started my path as an activist way back when, in high school, just like our climate strikers who are going to be here speaking today. Our planning committee has convinced me to share a few words about my background, and this is going to be awkward, but is it okay with y'all? So it's hard to remember exactly when I started to be engaged with social and environmental justice. When you're born into a certain positionality, resisting is just a way of being. But it was when I was 14, after joining a youth movement, working for community-based solutions to environmental problems, that I started to understand how collective actions have the power to transform our material reality. Visiting an MST camp, I came from the movement of landless worker. Ask more about that to me later. I just saw how people who have forever worked the land under some real exploitative conditions could finally claim back their political power and their rights through the access and respect for the land and dignified labor. Although my first introduction to activism was very much based on environmentalism, especially agroecology, permaculture, and agrarian reform, once I was in college in 2010, I started to put some pieces together. I became very active in the students' movement, advocating for democratic access, content, and processes in higher education. My University of SCAR was one of the first of the São Paulo region to join an historical strike that took place in 2012 in Brazil. And it was through that work that I was introduced to the amazing women of the Campo Popular, as well as the grassroots branch of popular feminism through an organization called the World March of Women, with whom I've organized until the coup d'etat that took from power the democratically elected President Dilma Rousseff in 2015. So back home, I was raised by an unconventional family of 3 strong and wise women who, despite of not knowing what the word feminism really meant, or not knowing the word feminism, they knew what it meant, have taught me early on about the power and necessity of cultivating solidarity and empowerment amongst women for the transformation of the world that we live in. So it was wonderful to be surrounded by other strong women who could take those values to the streets. Together with a variety of other grassroots social movements, we've raised over 7 million signatures in a multi-state coalition that was fighting for political reform that would prevent private money's interference in political campaigns. But unfortunately, it was a little bit too late. Shortly after that, the reactionary imminence of a coup d'etat orchestrated both by the Brazilian media, judiciary, and the elites has led me to accept a master's degree scholarship and come to study in the US. Which brings us to now. So in my studies at Western Washington University, I had a chance to talk to fellow scientists in Brazil and in Peru about science policies, and to connect how the hegemonic understanding of scientific, educational, and career structures built by our bank educational system have frequently maintained just the colonial power structures that we knew. But while I was diving into the books, the contradictions of capitalism kept calling me to action. This time, at the center of the empire, the USA. So after a short break from 2015 to 2016 of serving and learning alive, I joined forces with the Whatcom Peace and Justice Center and with other grassroots organizing in Bellingham, resisting the current fascist regime, peacekeeping for water protection, solidarity actions, and fighting against the deportation of our immigrant leaders.
Yeah.
And while today I grieve through the collapse of democracy in Brazil and loss of my indigenous compañeros' homes and territories in the Amazon, sharing my perspective with you as a woman of color from the Global South and learning in solidarity with the movement leaders that are here in struggle in the eye of the hurricane, the center of the empire, the USA, have been what kept me alive in such dark times. That praxis and community, along with the passion for liberation, intersectionality, art, organized anti-capitalistic rebelliousness, and above all, popular education, are at the core of my activism and at the center of what I have to share, the Whatcom Peace and Justice. I would like to invite each and every one of you to think about your own and to feel connected with the youth leaders that are standing here today. What was inspiring to you? What brought you to action? How did you deal with the cynicism of others around you, and why did you stop to care or to act? May we always have the fearless, youthful feistiness to complement the wisdom and patience that only comes with time. Please put your hands together and welcome to stage Kurt Dubar, who will announce this year's very special Howard Harris Award.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to my friends, my family, and my Whatcom Bellingham Peace Community. From all of our different organizations, we come together on this day to celebrate the same thing, peace. And which reminds me, what did the marshmallow rabbit say to the marshmallow baby chick? Give peeps a chance. Look, any of you who know me knew you weren't going to get out of here tonight without a bad joke. It's over with now. Now we can get on to the matter at hand, and it is my distinct pleasure to be able to tell you about the awardee this year, the Howard Harris Award, Kerry Johnson. I nominated him, that's why I'm up here giving the speech. But he's a remarkable individual, and I first met Kerry in 2002. We both felt the shudder that was going on, the wave that was sweeping the country, the war fever, and we both kind of spontaneously ended up on the same corner that people had been going to for many years prior. I had never really paid the peace vigil much attention one way or another. I'd lived here since '87. I'd seen them out there, drove by them almost dismissively, even though, you know, I was a Vietnam War protester and a draft dodger myself. But those days, I thought, were behind me until that awful, fateful autumn when I think we all knew war was coming. I walked out of Rite Aid, spontaneously walked across the street where the vigil was held, picked up the pile of signs that they had there that anybody could help themselves to, and stood in protest and just saying, not my name. And there next to me was Kerry Johnson. And by the way, also Howard Harris. And I kept going. And every time I was there, Kerry was there. And over the years, we shared many a Friday from 4 to 5 on that corner. Increasingly, Kerry began to take leadership. He began to organize our signs. He began to hold social gatherings. Right away, he had things that we like to call, in the spirit of revolution, the committees of correspondence. And basically it was therapy. We all got together at his house and wrung our hands and tried to understand what was wrong with the country. Why were we intent on going to war? We didn't solve that problem, of course, and the war happened anyway. But talking to others, that peace community, having that in common, helped. And Kerry was always a part of that. We held those at his house. He's organized picnics. Just recently, we had a memorial to past vigil members who have gone on to the great protest in the sky. And he's always there knitting us together. He has, over the years, since that fateful autumn in 2002, he has become our leader. And I can't begin to convey to you how much we, the Peace Vigil at least, appreciate him and admire him and love him. You've probably seen his van around town. It's a mobile peace embassy. All of the apparatus and accoutrements of our signs and stands are inside his van. He hauls them around. He gets there early in the afternoon and starts setting those things up after parking in a space that Martina has reserved, sitting there usually for an hour or two, bless her heart, every Friday, feeding the meter. And that's the kind of little things that happens that pulls that little vigil together and makes it the community that has meant so much to me over the years. I've missed very few. I worked on ships in the summertime, and I was always anxious to come back and get on land and stand with my sign again, with my compañeros and compañeras. And you know, there's a lot that Kerry's done. I could go on and on and on. But from all of his efforts a few years ago, we got the Peacemakers Award from the Whatcom Dispute Resolution Center. I'm not sure that's their name, but when we got that, we all had agreed to go to the dinner. There were 10 or 12 of us sitting there in our blue shirts. And there was no question. There was not even any debate at all as to who was going to go up there and accept the war chorus. It was Kerry Johnson. So, right now, I would like to give him another award that is very much deserved. So, come on up, Kerry, here.
Good evening. Thank you, Kurt. At the vigil, we call him Captain Quirk. It's a kind of takeoff of the original Star Trek captain, Captain Kirk, Captain Quirk, and somewhat well deserved. So, I've got a few words that I thought I'd read here, because I'm not a public speaker, and so I will. I'm extremely honored to have this award, and also, I'd have to say, a tad embarrassed. I do what I do, and I enjoy it. So I'm at the corner, we call it the corner. That's my community, that's even my church. These are good people. And so I give an award every time I go. And I haven't spent a whole lifetime doing this. It's another story, but how I got to where I am. But I've evolved these last few years, and since I'm not dead yet, I'm hoping I can live longer and dedicate more of my life, that this award will push me to do more.
All right.
So I was, like I said, I was a bit embarrassed reading the names of the previous award winners. I know Dottie Dale is sitting in the back. She's one such. I've seen Barbara Rothbard, Shirley Osterhaus, Jamie Donaldson. I'm not sure who else has won the award, but these people have really been instrumental in our community to bring both peace and justice. And that's why I, compared to them, I feel a little embarrassed, but I accept it and I appreciate the honor. So, without any further ado, we'll move on.
So we have the honor to introduce two youth activists that are part of a statewide organization, Washington Youth Climate Strike, and that are here today to talk about their climate strike that happened at City Hall yesterday and why they are passionate about environmental issues.
I'm so excited about the contrast. Please welcome to stage Callie Showalter and Maren Warney, who are youth leaders that we have so much to learn from based on what I see yesterday.
It's great to see you all tonight. Who went to the strike on Friday? Can you see raise your hand? Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for coming. Did everyone enjoy it? Do you feel inspired?
So it took a long time and hard work to organize, but we were super happy with the turnout. The Herald reported 2,500 people marching. Yeah. So that was awesome and it was super empowering.
So we sort of became involved in this activism and this idea of striking because we obviously are very young, but we, like everyone, knows what, like, we all here today know what climate change is doing, and we know that we need to stop this, and we want to make lasting change in the world.
Yeah.
So as youth, we don't have, say, the same opportunities as adults. So one of the things that we can do is choose to strike school. And so that is part of the global climate strike movement, started and inspired by Greta Thunberg, and we are taking part of it here in Washington State, and it's empowering. So both me and Callie are part of Washington Youth Climate Strikes. It's a branch of the national organization, United States Youth Climate Strikes, and we participate in strikes every couple months to send a message to both the adults and the other youth in our community that climate change is an urgent issue and we need to take action now.
Our goal essentially is we want to inspire hope within people, but we also want to inspire action. We want to inspire people to take action rather than just saying, oh, we hope this problem will go away, or we have hope and we have each other. We want that, but we also want to take action. We want everyone to be attending the strikes if they can make it. We want everyone to be spreading awareness and telling their friends and family, like, here's what you can do to help out. Like, carpool, compost, ride your bike. Write to your representatives and tell them why you're passionate about this. And vote for people that you think and that you believe are going to make change.
So to sort of talk about what happened on Friday, we started off with a rally. We had some incredible speakers. We had some young kids from elementary school. We had middle school speakers, high school speakers, and some indigenous people from our own nation. And it was just incredible to be a part of. And I personally felt some incredible incredible sense of hope that I haven't felt in a long time, and being able to see everyone's empowerment really just gave me the hope that maybe we will be able to save our planet. So our speaking time here today is just short, but we want to inspire you all to keep going, to keep striking, to keep speaking out, and to do whatever you can to make a difference, because only can we make a difference together.
We have a lot to learn from our young leaders who are challenging systems for the future generations. Thank you for your leadership. This activism will stay and impact you for the rest of your life. So now I will be introducing a Whatcom Peace and Justice Center board member. Let's give it up for Josh for being the brave fundraiser he is.
We all want to do something about climate action for peace, right? And there are so many ways that people in this room are involved in thinking about the way that militarism and war is doing damage to our climate. And it's increasing the amount in war and conflict around the world. And we know that if we're going to have a just transition away from fossil fuels, we need to do something about how much fossil fuels the U.S. military consumes every year. I recently found out that the U.S. military consumes more fossil fuels than 144 countries on this planet. Right? So there are almost 150 countries that are using less fossil fuels than our military alone. So we know we're not going to get to a just transition unless we do something to address that. And we know that all of these movements are connected. And so we want to think about how best to support them. Now, certainly there are some amazing and wonderful national organizations and international organizations that will do a lot of amazing things. Our alternatives to military service programs. Alternative to military service, those who don't know, we visit every single high school in Whatcom County every year in order to make sure that young people there know that they have other options beyond just going into the military or just going to college.
Thank you, Josh, so much for the skillful ask. I could have never done better. And now I have the honor to introduce two of my favorite speakers in this part of the country. Women of Color Speak Out is a collective of Seattle activists working to educate and inform communities about the connections between the climate breakdown and systems of oppression. They're focused on shifting the narrative of climate movement to one that goes beyond the superficial causes like fossil fuels to the deeper injustices of the world by decolonizing our minds. They speak from their personal truths and share unique perspectives on demanding climate justice and collectively creating a new just future for us all. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Hi everyone. How's everyone doing tonight? Do you feel empowered? I hope so. Okay, so I hope that I can contribute to that kind of energy. My name is Patricia Allen Dick. I also go by Chickenshaw, Glacier Bear Woman. I am Tlingit tribe of Southeast Alaska. I'm actually an elected official for that tribe. So I'm on tribal council for Tlingit and Haida, as well as being mixed mostly Mohawk and Seneca on the East Coast, and Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean as well. And so those are very mixed, but those are some of my very strong identities that I always try to hold in that space. And I think it's very important to share where you are, where you come from. You have the privilege of knowing that. Somebody told me once, which grandmothers are you going to deny? Which grandmothers are you going to not acknowledge? So you have to acknowledge all of them as much as you can, and even settle any kinds of indifferences, because their stories are part of your stories and they're contained in you. And so so it's important for me to share that I also am a very active member of Canoe Journeys. I was able to do the paddle to the Lummi this year. To be around that awesome, powerful medicine. My people are intermarried with many of the Lummi Nation, and so I always acknowledge that is many of the members of some of my own family. So I'm always very grateful to be up here up north and up in more northern Coast Salish territories, as well as working and continue to organize as an Indigenous person with the Coast Salish communities. And so right now, really quick, I want you all to kind of look at what you're wearing right now, your jewelry, your clothing, everything. I want you to think of what the most raw material of that is, whether it's cotton, silver, different things like that. And I want you to ask yourselves, do you know where that comes from? Do you know where your silver comes from? Do you know how old it is? Do you know how many people reused it, recycled it? Do you know how many people fought for that silver? Do you know how old it is? Do you know who was enslaved or who was oppressed to extract that for you? And I want you to think about that as I'm saying what I'm going to share, how I'm going to tie a lot of what's going on with the International Day of Peace with environmental issues and also how it ties to all of you as people, as human beings, how it also ties to me as an Indigenous person who lives an Indigenous lifestyle. Something I want to say is there is a difference between being Native and being Indigenous. Indigenous is a lifestyle, it's a way of living that goes outside of a racialized identity of being Native American. Before I am Native to the Americas, I am Tlingit Alaskan from my nation of Tlingit. And so that is a political national identity. I'm from a nation that has our own constitution. So it's very important to acknowledge that. And that much of our loss of identity as Indigenous people, because we all were once Indigenous, that had ceremonies with lands, that had language that tied with lands, it's very important to understand that that displacement is part of our settler colonialism. When I grew up in Seattle. I grew up not having a relationship directly with Coast Salish communities. I grew up traveling, and everywhere I traveled, I did not make it my responsibility to make relationships with the people who call that their homelands. So those types of things are just good practices just to keep when you're going somewhere, when you're traveling somewhere, and that identity is also really healing. And sometimes, as I said, we don't always know where we come from. We don't always have those ties, and that's part of our own traumas and part of our own seek for our own identity and healing. And through my Afro-Caribbean identity, that's something that I'm going to spend probably the rest of my life really working on, is those ties with that indigeneity of myself. It's a privilege to have access to your genealogy. It's a privilege to not just know what a percentage is, but know the faces that come with that, the stories that come with that. And I really want to get, though, into the climate justice and the climate work that we're doing, what we're tying with that, with all of these things we're talking about. So when we're talking about nation building, when we're talking about peace, when we're talking about doing any of this work, it's important to understand that a lot of the U.S. Constitution is built off of Native laws. It's built off of especially what you call the Iroquois Confederacy, a band of different tribes that came together that said, in order for us to live in a civilized way of respecting each other's humanity, we have to have a great law of peace. And so they created a great law of peace. And through that, a lot of the founding fathers used a lot of those to create the Constitution, which is the ideas of equality, the ideas of having your own private property, the ideas of freedom of speech. These were also indigenous laws before they became the Constitution. There are books on this. there are presidents who have recognized that history. In addition to that, feminism in the US, the suffragettes had worked with matrilineal cultures to create some of the equality, to create some of the equity that we have now and are continuing to strive for. These were ideas that were not just coming out of thin air. These were ideas that had already, through trial and error, for several centuries, for these tribal nations to be able to adapt and be able to cultivate as something that you see now in the Constitution. And so it's important to acknowledge that when we're fighting for equality and peace and really being able to reconcile, it's understanding that a lot of this is with the foundations of Indigenous knowledge and acknowledging that Indigenous knowledge. And so we're one of the nations that also, though, doesn't want to have we can't agree on a collective truth. And that's one of our problems of trauma, one of our problems of not having the world peace that we need, is that we cannot agree on enslavement, we cannot agree on genocide, we cannot agree on colonization in this country. And a lot of that is because we don't want to have to reconcile with that. We don't want to have to deal with recompensating, with correcting, and not just from a systematic level, but also from an individual level between people. And so a lot of my undergrad, I studied international truth and reconciliation and human rights. And when we're talking in ties to climate change and things like that, it's also important to understand that in Latin America, what's going on right now with the Amazon, with all these different things, a lot of this has to do with this history of people not acknowledging international law as law, not acknowledging genocide, and being accountable for that. And so it's also the idea that international law, Indigenous law cannot be international law, but it should be. And within the US, for example, we don't want to acknowledge Indigenous law as federal law, although it is. Almost every treaty, if every treaty, has been broken with the US government. So my people did not make treaties because we had a feeling that they would not be respected as federal laws. So we're building constitutions instead of making treaties. So I think it's very important it's very important for people to really understand that their apathy for Indigenous people, for displaced people, for refugee communities is their own displacement with their own Indigenousness. It's a lot of their own displacement with their own understandings of relationships and laws and language with lands. So really looking at the scope of that and acknowledging that and all those intricate things that happen within that, such as science, such as law, such as politics. And I hope that as we're continuing to value Indigenous knowledge, that we're being able to really value our own ancestors' knowledge as well, that came before many of the wars, before many of the huge waves of violence that happened within our own communities. Being mixed European myself, I've had to learn that, and I've actually been mind blown the amount of resilience, the amount of knowledge that's kept, and also the amount of tools for humanity and really seeing that within one another, and how that's seen now in politics. But I hope that does inspire, and I am very excited to bring up now Zarna Toshi from Women of Color Speak Out. And she's going to be tying it with her own parts, and we'll kind of touch base on both aspects of the work that we do.
Acknowledging my sister, Tati, thank you so much for the wisdom that you just shared. Acknowledging all of you, acknowledging that we are on stolen native land, acknowledging the ancestors of the Lummi, and acknowledging their descendants who continue to fight to protect the land and the water and the sky and all of the people. My name is Zana, and today being an International Day of Peace, and understanding that we are in climate collapse and that the situation is grim, and that there is not much peace in the world. I want to tell you some good stories. Because we have to have hope. We cannot strive for peace without hope. We cannot strive for peace without believing that it's possible. So I'm going to tell you some stories from my recent travels, and everything that I'm about to tell you literally happened in the last 3 weeks. I went on a speaking tour in the South, and when I say South, I mean the deep South. I'm talking about Louisiana, I'm talking about Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, passing through Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, all of those different territories. And in telling you these stories, I'm going to be sharing some advice with you, right? I'm going to be sharing some tips with you about how to take climate action for peace. So, the first bit of advice: when you take climate action, go to your elders beforehand and ask for their blessing. Go to your elders and ask for their blessing. Now the question is, who is an elder? Because just because someone's old doesn't make them an elder. Here's an example. I was doing a presentation in the French Quarter in New Orleans. And in the French Quarter, there is a Pakistani Muslim elder, matriarch, who has a business just 2 doors down from the Sani Art Gallery, which was where I was presenting. And knowing that there's a Pakistani matriarch so close by, there's one of my elders close by. My family is from India, but Pakistan used to be part of India. We call ourselves Desi. Desi means countryman. And knowing that there was a Desi elder close by, I went to meet with her. And I invited her. And I asked for her blessing. And she came. And when she came, she said, I get invited to a lot of things, and I never go. But I wanted to come here today. Because in our culture, we know that when your elders bless you, you will be successful. And you ask for my blessing, and that's why I'm here. That's peace. That's climate action. That's love. And every day that I was on that tour, it's a dangerous place. Being a brown woman, being a brown Hindu woman, speaking on climate action and climate justice in the Deep South, in the land of Trump, it's a dangerous thing. And every day an elder showed up to give me a blessing. Every day. In my language, we call it Chhatra Chaya. Chhatra Chaya means the shelter of your elders. They protect you. So even though, I was going around doing all of this stuff, I felt protected. I felt safer because I knew that I had their blessing with me. The next thing, resist any effort by the system to diminish your power. Here's an example. I gave a presentation at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Charlottesville is where there have been many horrifying stories of violence and white supremacist violence. We've heard a great deal of this. I was organizing with many of the students who'd gone through that violence. And while we were organizing, they referenced someone who they were working with, and I said, oh, is that one of the students? And they said, no, that's an adult. And I said, you're all over 18, right? And they said, yeah. And I'm like, so you're all adults, right? You know that, right? And they were like, oh my God, you're right. I was like, whoa. You can join the army. You can vote. You can get married. You can drive. This system wants to burden you with massive amounts of student loans because they say you're an adult. But it wants you to believe you're not. It wants you to believe you don't have that power, and this system infantilizes you in order to diminish that power. And their eyes were like saucers, like they were like, oh, you're right. Resist any effort from the system to diminish your power. The next, work with youth. Uplift them, empower them. So for example, those Virginia students that I'm talking about, that I was organizing with in Charlottesville, in Williamsburg, they are at this point in time figuring out ways to organize with high school students. Because as college students, they want to uplift the high school youth and work with them. That's climate action for peace. That's the people on the front lines coming together. The next one, have the courage to reach out to communities you don't know. Have that courage to reach out to the communities you don't know. So for example, I started doing this work in the South because organizers in Florida outreached to me. And they said, we would love for you to come down and share some of your wisdom with our people. And what that meant was that when I went to Gainesville just last week, they had an entire room of women of color, many of whom had never met each other before, but who all wanted to organize. And after the workshop and the presentation, they started exchanging contact information. They lived in the same town, yet they'd never met each other. It took me, coming from Seattle, to get them all in the same room, talking to each other, saying, oh my God, you live down my street? We can work on this together. That's climate action for peace. That's empowering people to connect with each other, to work together, and to have the courage to go to a community that you don't know, because they had the courage to reach out to you. The next, be willing to share what you know with other communities. I said be willing to work with other communities, but very often what happens is we say that we're working with other communities, but we won't share our knowledge with them or our wisdom with them. We won't share our resources with them, particularly if you are privileged. You must be willing to share your resources with other communities so that they can get this work done. For example, that entire tour was mostly funded by one family. One white family that had privilege wanted to make sure that this tour could happen because they wanted, the youth of that family wanted what I had to say to be shared with as many people in the South as possible. That's climate action for peace. The next, call out the mistakes that your community makes with love. Don't cover it up. Don't pretend like it doesn't happen. Don't pretend like it didn't happen. Don't pretend like, oh, they didn't mean it. You have to call it out, but call it out with love so that the person or the people that you're talking to hear it and know that you still love them and know that you still want to work with them. For example, one of the places that I presented at in the South on this tour, the youth who asked me to be there, they said, can you please address transphobia? Because we don't feel like we're safe here. We feel like the gender norms here are so suffocating that we can't be who we truly are. So I did. But the way that I did it was by talking about that issue, talking about transphobia, talking about homophobia, talking about gender norms, talking about the binary and the patriarchal oppression that it is, and talking about it in the context of the things that the people that we're going to relate to. Police brutality, homelessness, gentrification. So when we're talking about the ways in which we might be making mistakes, when we understand that we're all making mistakes and that we're all dealing with oppression, and many of us dealing with intersectional oppression at the same time, and talking about it in that way, and letting people know this is how this is hurting me. It's hurting me in these ways that also hurt you. The next, be willing to hear difficult truths. Be willing to hear difficult truths. While I was in New Orleans, I interviewed a Katrina survivor. Katrina was one of the first major climate disasters that happened in this country, where people literally, for the first time, put a name on it. They said climate change. Right? For the first time, they said this is climate change. This is showing us that it is already hitting us. And this Katrina survivor, his name was Dwayne, he said, when we were in the shelters, we were already getting calls from people wanting to buy our houses before the flood waters had even receded. And he said, the army came in with machine guns. They forced us onto helicopters. They took us to the airport. They forced us onto planes. They didn't tell us where they were taking us. And when we said, why won't you tell us where you're taking us? They said to Dwayne and all of the people with him, it's classified. And when the people there said, well, can you at least take us to where we have family, where we know people? They said, no, we can't do that. It's classified. And he ended up in North Carolina, where he didn't know anyone, where he didn't have any friends. And the Red Cross people there told him and all of the other people, you can't go back. I am well informed about climate issues. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that. And Dwayne was one of the few people who resisted the gentrification of New Orleans, and he went home. He told me most of the people that he knew aren't there anymore. Be willing to hear difficult stories and amplify their stories. I got footage of it. It will soon be online. So look for that. The next thing, listen to your matriarchs. Uplift them. Connect other people with them. An example of this, when I was in Williamsburg organizing with the students there, one of the students, his name is Kibiriti, he knew a black matriarch who had been running a sustainable farm for decades in that area. And he reached out to her and he asked her to come. He asked her to connect with the other students and with me. And because of that, we had a chance to meet with her. We got her blessing. And we're now able to organize with her, and her wisdom is incredible. I won't mention her name because she actually doesn't like to be in the public eye. But if you want to be connected with her, come to me and I'll let you know. The next, believe in humanity. Believe. There's so much ugliness that we're being shown right now. There's so much cruelty. There's so much viciousness. But the truth is that there is work happening all over the world and all over this colonized land. Like I said, I was in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia. Many of those students were the students who were hit by that car that was driven by a white supremacist fascist who drove into them. Many of them were injured, many of them have scars, many of them have trauma. One person died. And one of the black organizers there, one of the youth, he said to me, one of our white sisters shouldn't have had to die for people to understand the white supremacist violence we're facing. She shouldn't have had to die. Let's believe in humanity first before that happens. Let's believe and see the souls that we have within one another. And I'll leave you with this last one. Exchange contact info with the people around you. I'm not kidding, for real. Do that. It's really important because you want to connect with these people, you want to work with them, you want to meet with them, you want to like them, you want to be their friends, you want to get together and eat food with them. You want to talk about peace with them. You want to dream together, and you want to build those dreams together.
Indigenous women, brown women, and black women have been at the forefront of fighting for sustainability and climate justice from the beginning. We should celebrate them today, but every single day moving forward. But the night is coming to an end, but it would not be International Day of Peace without some music.
Clear the runway. Clear the runway to your heart. Clear the runway for my light. For my light is peace. Let the light of peace come to your heart. The light of peace is the only gift that I can afford to give to you. Clear the runway, clear the runway to your heart. Clear the runway for my light, for my